So when faced with a problem, there's really three possible things we can do. We can ignore it, we can try to solve it, or we can exploit it, try to make a buck. So I'd like you all to think with me today about how some of the people in the tech industry are defining their problems, our problems, and what they're doing about those problems. Because about 9-10 months ago, last April, I started thinking about this. I sat down one Friday afternoon and I wrote a rant about the sharing economy. That's, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, those guys. Since now, it's now called, the gig economy or sometimes the on-demand economy, and it's become a much more crowded field. You got all these little app-based personal valet services that are all predicated on the idea that there's always going to be a desperate pool, a huge pool of people who are willing to work any hours for very little pay and no job security and no chance for advancement. And I looked at this business model and I said, this is undermining civilization. What these guys are doing, if they have their way, pretty soon there's not going to be any full-time jobs for any of us. I said, because what they're really doing is they're formalizing and expanding the shadow economy. Everybody knows what the shadow economy is, right? It's that guy down on Monument Street, maybe selling loose cigarettes or sometimes hats and mittens this time of year, or maybe crack. The shadow economy, it exists in every economy, in every country, to a greater or lesser extent, according to how much civilization is present. And so I wrote this all down, and I looked at what I'd written, and I thought, well, this really isn't much of an insight. I wasn't really going to publish it. I sent it around the office. Well, it did get up online pretty soon as a blog post. And then it got 60,000 reads in a couple of days. Got about 20 times the usual traffic that a blog post at City Paper gets. So it hit a nerve. And the tech sites picked it up, Slashdot bounced it. Anyway, then something weird happened. People disagreed with me. I know. So no, what people didn't say, oh, you're wrong about there not being any jobs in the future. What they said is that, what do you want with a job for? Jobs aren't such a great thing. You can, having an economy based on full-time jobs is really inefficient, is what people were saying to me. And then they said something that irritated me. They said, you know what, it doesn't matter what you think because we're going to do it anyway. It's inevitable, so adapt or die. And I was like, really? Because I always thought I had a choice, right? I thought we all had a choice about what kind of society we want to build for ourselves, that we could go to the ballot box and choose the people who are going to promulgate the laws that companies have to follow in a democratic and free society. Oh, no, my critics, I'm arguing on the internet. My critics are like, no, you got that all wrong. Free is when we get to do what we want to do. And democracy is when you choose the app that best fits your lifestyle. And the government better get out of the way. And I'm like, I was dumbfounded, right? Because I'd never been wrong on the internet before. So anyway, I wrote my thing and I took my lumps and I didn't think too much about it for a few weeks until I got invited to give this talk. And then I thought, wow, I got a second chance. Now I'm gonna convince these people that they're really not correct. But then I thought, well, how am I going to do that? I don't have a lot of juice in this business. I'm not a venture capitalist. I don't code. I'm a reporter at a newspaper. I am a low-level worker in an industry that's dying precisely because it has failed to adapt to technology. What can I do? I know what I'll do. I'm going to get their argument right. I'm going to figure out exactly what they're saying. I'm going to pay a lot of attention to what they're saying, and then I'm going to really know them. And then I'm going to be able to do something with that. So I started paying attention to this business. And pretty soon, Uber is starting to poach Lyft's drivers. And they give them a little bonus for this. And then Uber's got somebody on the payroll, a bunch of people on the payroll. Their whole job is to mess with Lyft. They order a ride, and then they cancel it at the last moment. I was like, this is great. Then Uber starts saying, and you know what? Our drivers make $90,000 a year on average. On average. I'm like, wow, that's almost unbelievable. And then Uber's got one of their high-level peoples in a whole room of people, and he starts saying, the people who criticize us, Uber, we ought to do some opposition research on that. And we can get the dirt on them and shut them up. And I'm like, but there's still people on the other side of this argument, and they're all like, leave me alone. Right? I'm disrupting you. Well, finally, I got the picture, and I was like, I'm not going to argue with these people, because to some people in the tech industry, civilization's an obstacle. It's an obstacle to their hitting it big. And these are people for whom innovation is progress minus the Enlightenment. Progress minus the Enlightenment. We don't want any John Locke in it. We don't want any Rousseau. There's not even any Adam Smith, because we have Ayn Rand in SparkNotes. And so, yeah, I finally got, so I finally realized I can't argue with them. I got to convince everybody who's not them that what's at stake here is a big deal. What's at stake here is a social compact. And another thing, that this really isn't an innovation. What's happening is really just an evolution of what's been going on in business in America, especially for the past 40 years. When you think about it, you got to look back and see who's making the money and who's really making a success of themselves. They're the companies that offload cost and risk. Right? So you're in a high-tax business, well, you get some accountants and you figure out how to reincorporate in Bermuda or something like that, right? Or if you're a rich person, you don't want to pay taxes either, you get wealth management to come and put all your stuff in a trust, right? Or, you know, let's just say you're wealth management, by the way, this is a huge industry that didn't exist until the 1980s. Okay, so you've got a factory and you're paying, you know, union labor. Well, nobody wants to do that. What do you do? Say it with me, folks. What do you do? That's right. You send it to China. Everybody knows it's a cliche. But what if you can't do that? What if you have to have people here? Well, you turn them into independent contractors, don't you? And that's what the taxi industry started doing in the 1970s. That was an innovation. All these little taxi companies all over the country, one by one, and in Paris, they started calling in all their taxi drivers to a room. He said, you know what, folks? I'm tired of paying you. You're going to pay me from now on. That's how we're going to do it. $100 a week, say. And for that, you get to drive the car you've been driving all this time. You get the license to be a taxi driver, and you also get the dispatch service. And here's the great news. Every penny over that $100 a week, you get to keep. Welcome to the American dream, fellow entrepreneurs. So all these taxi drivers are like, because now suddenly they're responsible for all the insurance they didn't have to deal with before. They're never going to get overtime anymore. They can't get paid vacations. Right? If they get hurt in their job, they're not eligible for workman's comp. If they get fired, they're not eligible anymore for unemployment insurance. Right? And then at the end of the year, they get to deal with their taxes like a small business. So you get these taxi drivers, they're like, So what do you think happens? Well, a lot of them blow it off. Right? They don't know what they're doing. Plus, they're an all-cash business. You're turning them into scofflaws. Right? Oh, but also, they're not making much cash. Why not? You might ask. Because that $100 a week has nothing to do with what it costs to keep a car running. It has everything to do with what the taxi company owners knew it would take those guys and women 40 hours a week to make. By the mid-1990s in Central Florida, taxi drivers were paying $500 and up to rent their vehicles, and they were clearing about $25,000 a year on average. And I know this because one of the drivers called me up one day. I was a reporter down there, and he said, we're tired of this. We're going to sue Mears Transportation. He was then and still is the dominant taxi provider in Central Florida. He says, we're suing that guy. I said, it's amazing. Why don't you let me see what you're up to? They spent a few weeks and checked out their numbers, and they were telling the truth. They were making $6 an hour, working 70 to 80 hours a week for 52 weeks a year. So I called up Paul Mears, and I went to his office, and I said, Mr. Mears, you guys making $6 an hour. What do you say to that? And the guy leans back in his chair, and he says, oh, those guys, they're crying poor mouth. You want to know why? Because they don't like to pay their taxes. Now, at the time, Paul Mears had a 50-foot yacht called Off Duty. Just for fun, a few weeks ago, I checked him out. I wanted to see how he's doing. Turns out now he's got a 78-foot yacht called Off Duty. And look at this. I don't know if you can see that. It's owned by a trust. You know why? Wealth management, my friends, because nobody likes to pay taxes. What are taxes, by the way? Taxes are the price we pay for civilization. Okay, so fast forward. 2010, you're in San Francisco. All these kids, young people, are trying to make a living in coding and stuff like this. A lot of them don't have cars. Taxis are horrible. None of them want to drive us such short distances. They won't come. When they do come, they're surly. The drivers have a bad attitude. Right? The cabs stink. They actually smell inside. You get in the back seat, it's all hammocked up. It's horrible. Taxis suck. Why? All these problems with the taxi industry can be laid at the feet of the 1978 innovation that turned them all into 70-hour, 80-hour-a-week hustlers. Okay? But this is a regulated industry. How could this happen? Oh, well, maybe the taxi companies own the industry. Maybe they own the regulators. This is not a secret either, right? Uber, Lyft, all these guys are talking about how we're against the taxi monopolists. We're going to beat those guys. Well, okay, good. Let's see what you guys are doing. You know the problem. Are you ignoring it, solving it, or exploiting it? Look at the difference in the business model. Taxis, regulated fare. Uber, we have an algorithm. We're going to charge you what we think we can get away with. Okay, score one for them. Taxis, you're paying to drive the car, maybe rent the medallion. Uber, Lyft, they're like, everybody should drive for us. You should all drive for us. Uber's like, they make $90,000 a year. Why wouldn't you? Taxis are a regulated business. The main regulation is they limit the number of cars out on the street. And here's the crazy thing. They do it on this crazy theory that if there's too many people out there trying to collect fares, there won't be enough fares for anybody to eat. Uber, Lyft, anybody should drive for us. I talked to the co-founder of Lyft. He says, everybody should drive for us. I said, his name is John Zimmer. I said, John, if everybody's driving for you, how's anybody going to make a living? He says, oh, they're doing other things. They might be teachers, they're bartenders, something like that. I said, really? In other words, my business model has nothing to do with my workers making a living. The other thing he said that hadn't got enough attention, I think, John Zimmer, co-founder of Lyft, these are the good guys, they're getting beat up. He says, Lyft was inspired by what the other co-founder found in Zimbabwe. This guy was out in the hinterlands of Zimbabwe. People are walking down the street with dollar bills, with money in their hands. Anybody with a vehicle might stop and pick them up. He's looking at the shadow economy in a developing nation. And he says, oh, that's so social. We should uproot that, make that the way we do things in America. Any place you've traveled outside of, the major countries, you're going to find this thing. This one's the chicken bus. This is in Laos, I think. Looks pretty safe, right? That's the model, the third world. Okay? And by the way, it's illegal in Zimbabwe, too. In Harare, they have regular cabs. But this is not those. This is the illegal guys, right? Zimbabwe has a per capita income of $130 a year. What do you suppose happens when, oh, by the way, that means nobody really much pays taxes, that means the government's corrupt, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think happens when they don't pay the bribes that the cops demand in order for them to keep running illegally? Social. Okay, so imagine this. What if the burden of proof were reversed? What if it wasn't up to me to stand up here and make the case for why, the developing world's system isn't the thing we should graft onto America and make our future? What if instead it was the shadow economy people, they had to stand up here and make the positive case for why the developing world's social, political, economic system was the thing America ought to shoot for? 3 things you can do with a problem, right? You can ignore it, you can try to solve it, you can exploit it. Try to make a buck. So I want everybody to ask yourself, what are the sharing economy people choosing? And what are you going to do about it?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.